Okay, so before we start talking about the video I was just showing, we're going to talk about the paper. I do just want to remind everybody too that, like, I think I mentioned on Monday, right? I have a little bit of an ear infection. I went to the doctor the other day, so I can hear really, really, really well in one ear and not at all in the other. So it kind of, like, when all of you are talking, it kind of sounds like I'm standing in the middle of the Autobahn and there are cars whizzing by at 200 miles per hour on one side and nothing on the other side. So just please bear that in mind when you speak up today, right? That I can really only hear on this side of my head. And if you are all talking at once, then, which usually isn't a problem when you actually get into class, but yeah, if you're all talking at once, then I really can't hear anything. First thing we want to do is talk about your first paper, which is going to be due next Friday, right? At midnight, as is the case for all assignments that you turn in at home. So what you're going to be doing is a 1,000 to 1,500 word close reading of a single text from the first half of the semester, right? So really, like, anything that we've looked at up to the end of next week is fair game. I would argue that it's probably better if you start this earlier rather than later, though, and look at something that we have already read, right? Look at something we've already done this semester rather than waiting for something that we're going to do next week. Now, what I mean by close reading, right, is paying close attention to details in a text to look for meaningful patterns that you can use to build an argument about the text, right? So say, you're looking at Ovid's Metamorphoses, and you notice a particular pattern in the way the gods behave towards women, right? Okay, so fine, you've located a pattern there, you go and you choose all of the passages in which you see this pattern happening, and you make an argument as to what that all means, right? As to what the bigger meaning of that pattern is in the text. I would suggest, because of the nature of the class, that you try to make an argument as to what the pattern reveals about the values of the particular culture you're looking at, right? So, what does this reveal to us about Greek culture or Roman culture or Mesopotamian culture, what have you? Those are the kinds of arguments you should be looking to make. I also do want you to please, please, please directly quote your source texts. I receive too many papers from students where they just give me a lot of summary of the course text and they never actually show me the details that they're using to try to make an argument. They're using to try to make meaning out of the text. So make sure that you are directly quoting the passages that you are citing as evidence. Couple of quick guidelines, right? And you can read all of this on GeorgeView. It's been posted since the beginning of the semester. Your paper has to be submitted in 12-point type, Times New Roman font, and double spaced. This is mostly just so that it's easy for me to read, right? Times New Roman is an easier font on the eyes. Double spacing means I don't have to strain to look at what you have put down. I know that MS Word defaults to putting extra spaces between paragraphs. I want you to turn that feature off, right? You just go into the this button here, the line and paragraph spacing button in Word, and if you haven't already monkeyed with it, it will say remove space after paragraph. Click on that, and that'll fix that problem. Just use standard margins. Notation should be MLA style, parenthetical with a works cited page at the end, even though you are only going to be quoting from one text here, right? So if you are quoting from a text that has a known author, use the author's name and the page number. So say, right, Ovid 425 after the quote. If you are talking about a text that doesn't have a known author, then just abbreviate the name of the text. So say like Gilgamesh 25 and italicize the name of the text. Right, what else? If you have a quote that is 4 lines or longer, set it apart as a single-spaced block quote. Do you know what that means? Does everybody know what a block quote is? Okay, it's when you indent the whole 4 lines and then just go back to normal when you're done with a quote.
How do you do that?
Pardon?
You highlight it and then you go to like paragraph options and stuff and then what?
Why we like if you have more than 4 lines, you take your quote, and you put it down under, and then when they're done with that quote, you go back to normal.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Right. 1,000 words is the bare minimum acceptable word count. Right. You must have at least 1,000 words. Try not to go over 1,500 words. If you are going over 1,500 words, it means you have probably taken on a topic that is too big for the assignment. You should end up with about 4 or 5 pages. And the works cited page does not count, by the way, towards your total word count. Right, that's something that has to be there. And the paper has to be uploaded to the Dropbox in Georgia View by 11:59 p.m. on the due dates. So does anybody have any questions about any of this? Yeah, Zach.
Are you going to want us to use a different topic when we write our second paper, or can we expand on the ideas we?
You will have to use a different text when you write the second paper. So, you know, the second paper is going to be a comparative paper, right? One text from the first half of the semester, one from the second half of the semester. And yeah, it's going to have to be different text than you wrote your first paper on. Yeah, Corey.
Are you saying that like the midterm paper is kind of like our weekly response, it's just a little bit bigger?
Exactly, yeah. You're doing the same thing you're doing in the weekly response, except instead of like trying to pick apart a single quote, you're linking together a chain of quotes that you think are meaningful. Did you have a hand up, Ashley?
She answered it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Shannon.
So can we still do a weekly response next week?
Oh yeah, you still can. Yeah, if you really want to, go for it. And really, this is something, by the way, just as a quick reminder, some of you really kind of need to get on this, right? You got to do 10. You're only allowed to do 1 a week, and I'm still waiting on the first one from some of you. So, you know, do not forget to do this. Do not let this languish. Okay, any other questions before I proceed? All right, so let me tell you a little bit here about how you're going to be graded. I should mention as well that I do give extra credit if you go to the Writing Center. So if you go to the Writing Center, take the assignment sheet with you. Right, the assignment sheet, as I said, is on Georgia View, so don't say that you don't have it. They will send me an email to let me know that you were there and what you worked on, and you will get half a letter grades extra credit. All right. Now, as far as what you're being graded on, the big things here are going to be originality and clarity. Right. We'll start actually with clarity because that's a little bit simpler. Look, as far as English professors go, I am not a huge grammar Nazi. As long as I can understand what it is you are trying to communicate, I'm not really all that worried if your mode of expression is maybe a little bit clunkier than it could have been, right? A grammatical English sentence is a sentence that another speaker of English can understand. That's all a grammatical sentence means, really. That said, right, the more graceful and artful your sentences are, the easier it will be for you to make me understand what you are trying to say, right? So this operates on 2 levels here. On the one hand, right, make sure that you are writing clearly, right, that every sentence has a subject and a verb, and that it's always clear what the subject and the verb of every sentence happens to be. And don't get too complicated, right? Don't start just piling clauses on top of each other. If you find that you have a sentence that is a chain of commas and semicolons, try to pare it back and simplify it a little bit, right? What you're going for right, is not the incomprehensibility award, right? What you are going for is clarity, and clarity often means simplicity. This also means try not to use a 10-cent word in a case where a 2-cent word is actually more appropriate, right? Language is actually a very efficient beast, and we tend to drop words that we don't use anymore, or that we don't need anymore. So chances are that 2-cent word and that 10-cent word don't really mean quite the same thing. In general, you're going to be better off using the simpler word. You're also going to need to make sure that your paper is organized in a way that makes sense to someone who can't read your mind. Right? We have a tendency, I know this because this is how I particularly worked when I was a freshman and a sophomore, to kind of sit down at a computer and just spit out words a few hours before the paper is due, print it out, turn it in. The problem with this particular process is that you give relatively little thought to how your argument actually flows as a whole, right? You got all your points in, you said everything you needed to say, but you didn't necessarily say it in an order that is logical, because you didn't have time to go back and fix it, you didn't have time to go back and revise it. So try to start early enough that you can actually go back and see which points are most closely related to each other, right, and try to keep those points together, right? It's usually a good idea to try to lead with your second best example, with your second best argument, and finish up with your strongest argument. Finally, always make sure that you explain why the evidence you are citing means what you say it means. It's not always going to be self-evident and clear to me why, say, this particular passage should be interpreted the way you're telling me I should interpret it, right? Yeah, Corey.
You're expecting a thesis statement, right?
I am expecting a thesis statement, yes. And that thesis statement needs to be original, sufficiently complex, and arguable, right? It has to be a point with which someone could reasonably disagree. Yeah, Ashley.
Do you need a hard copy of this paper?
I do not need a hard copy of this paper, no. I know that, for one thing, you guys have to pay for printouts. So I no longer require hard copies for that reason. And also, I like being able to breathe. And, trees kind of help us do that. So the fewer we have to cut down, the better. All right. So, yes, as far as thesis statements are concerned, as I said, right, make sure your idea is sufficiently complex and is arguable. Don't choose to argue a point which no one could possibly disagree. And I'm really not interested in seeing you try to prove something true or false in the narrative, right? So don't look for something that seems to have a simple yes or no answer. Instead, look for something where you think you could make some kind of reasonable point of, like, how does this work and why is this in here? Right? So you're answering a how or why question rather than a what question. A good thesis statement is often going to place two different viable ideas in tension with each other, right? So say your surface reading of the text with what you think is actually going on. So, while Gilgamesh may appear to be about the enduring friendship between two demigods, it is actually about the ways in which women help men to achieve their goals, right? Something like that. So, start with the more obvious point and counter it with the less obvious point that is your actual argument. Yeah, Casey.
Are we allowed to email you with our ideas? And
Yes.
We're okay. So some people are like, no, I'm not going to help you at all.
No. And
I'm not saying
I realize that we are all very busy. I'm very busy, but honestly, I do sort of think that somebody who is not willing to talk over your ideas with you is kind of a shitty teacher. That's that's kind of not doing their job. So yeah, I am happy to talk over your ideas with you up to a point, right? I will look at drafts up to 48 hours before the due date. So if you get me a draft, if you get me even sort of ideas, at least 48 hours before the due date, I promise I will look at it. If you get it to me after that 48-hour window closes, I can't guarantee that I will get to it. But yeah, if you get it to me before that 48-hour window, then yes, I will definitely look at it. I will also though be doing one first come first serve, right? So the first person in line always gets their question answered or their draft looked at first, and I will help people whom I haven't helped yet before I will help people whom I have already helped, right? So if you are giving me your third draft, which some people do, yeah, I'll look at it, I will get to it, but I'm going to look at somebody else's first draft first, right? Make sense? Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the assignment? And you know, the sheet is posted on Georgia View. You can look at all this yourselves. I have told you what I think is most important to understand here. Is there anything else you feel is still unclear or?
Tomorrow night's play extra credit, that's participation credit, right?
Yeah, participation credit. And if you go to the thing this afternoon as well, right, there's the author coming to, did I mention this on Monday? I think I did, yes. There's the author coming to do a reading at 11. He'll be in the Jackson Hall Auditorium. Yeah, you will get extra participation credit if you go to that as well.
Where's the Jackson Hall?
Pardon?
Is it the same theater that we were in for the poet?
Yeah, probably. It's the one. It's the music department building. It's the one right before you get to the Storm Dome. Yeah, Shen. Yeah, that was what you were asking. Okay. All right. Anything else?
How long does this last?
Probably no more than an hour.
Yeah, or the.
You know what you want to play last?
What's this, 11?
Starts at 11. Yeah. So I mean, I'm heading right over there after this.
What time does the play start tomorrow?
The play.
8 o'clock, but doors open at 7:30.
How do you want us to like document that? Like, you want us to?
We have a program.
The play? Yeah. If you, there should be a program. Put your name on it. Bring to class with you next week, and give it to me, and then then it will count.
Does Jeff have to sign it?
Pardon?
Is Jeff signing it or no?
I mean, Jeff's signing programs for his theater pre-students, but I don't know if you're gonna make them sign it.
No, I'm not gonna. No, Jeff Green doesn't have to sign your program. If he really wants to, I mean, let him. There's no reason to stop him, I guess. But yeah, he doesn't have to sign your program. Okay, so if there are no other questions about the paper, I'm just going to say a brief word about the exam and how that's going to be set up, and then we'll talk about Confucius. Okay, so the exam is going to be in two parts. So first part is going to be short essay. I'm going to give you 3 questions. You will answer one of these questions. In 4 blue book pages. I will provide blue books. I know that you have to buy them in the bookstore, right? So I'm not going to make you guys pay extra money to take an exam. I will provide the blue books for you. I will also give you sample exam questions. They will be posted to the Georgia View site by Friday. They won't be the exact questions that will be on the exam. The questions on the exam will be more specific, but the sample questions will give you a chance to write practice essays, and they'll give you some idea of the kinds of broad themes I want you to focus on. The second part of the exam is going to be identification. So I will give you 12 terms. You will choose 8 to answer. And what you will have to give me are the name of the text from which the term is drawn or to which it is related, the name of the author of that text, and a brief definition of that term. So, if I was to say give you the term Tiamat, right, so Tiamat is from the Enuma Elish, and because there is no known author, you would put anonymous. Now, anonymous is the answer if history does not know who the author is, right? Not if you don't know who the author is.
So for Genesis, would we still?
That would be anonymous, because we don't, we know that Moses didn't actually write it, but we don't know who did.
Okay.
Right. And you know, right, and that's particularly complicated because it's a composite text and all that. Yeah, you would just put anonymous for that.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's
if you wanted like the different.
no. Yeah, if there's no known historical author, then you just put anonymous.
So Genesis would be Bible.
Pardon?
Genesis would be Bible for the text, right?
Well, I wouldn't ask you to identify Genesis because that is the text itself, right?
Yeah.
So Genesis would be the text, and the author would be anonymous.
Okay.
So let's say I gave you as a term, right, the Tower of Babel. Right, the text would be Genesis, right? Author would be anonymous. And then, you know, it would be tower that human beings attempted to build into the heavens. God destroys the tower and mixes up human languages to prevent such cooperation in the future. And you might want to add something as well to sort of how this plays into particular themes in the larger text as well. For example, you know, the way this plays into that kind of anti-technology, anti-building theme that we saw running through much of Genesis. Yeah, Corey.
I've never used Blue Book pages. How long is that?
Like 2/3 of a regular notebook page.
Something like that. Yeah, the blue books that they usually sell are about like yay big.
Oh.
Sometimes they order the wrong ones and they're quite a bit larger. If that is the case, then I will modify the requirements slightly.
So it's honestly just like a little passage of, okay.
Yeah, it's just like a little, yeah, just little booklet-sized kind of thing. What's that?
I don't think the blue books are college-ruled either.
No, I don't believe they are. Yeah. Okay, so you won't get any kind of study guide for me from the IDs, but I promise you that I will not put anything in there that we did not specifically talk about in class. So if you have been showing up, paying attention, and taking notes, you will have what you need to do the IDs. And look, it has generally been my experience that people who show up, come to class, and take notes usually do reasonably well on the exams, right? The idea is not to try to trip you up. The idea is not to try to, I'm not trying to, throw hurdles in your path here, right? There won't be trick questions. The whole idea is just for me to see what you're picking up on and what you aren't at this point in the semester. Okay, so any other questions about the exam?
When is it?
The ninth.
It is, yes, it is, yeah. So not next week, but the following week. Any other questions? All right, then let's talk a little bit about the video that I had playing when you came into class. Now I know, I can sort of tell from the roar of discussion that most of you were paying super close attention to it. Anything in particular you noticed about it? Anything that seemed interesting or weird?
It was kind of cultish, almost.
Well, I mean, it is a religious ceremony. I mean, it's...
But I don't know, it was kind of creepy to watch. I don't know, you're kind of always just like, okay. Because, like, not only, I guess, I don't want to call them, like, religious figures if they're not, but, like, I guess they'd be, like, relatable to, like, I don't know, the deacons of, like, Confucianism. Like, they were super stoic, and then, like, the people, you know, who were watching and stuff, they were super stoic and super, like, kind of creeped me out.
So if we had to talk about sort of like the attitude of the participants, right? Would you say they were joyful or solemn?
They were super.
Okay, yeah, it was pretty solemn, sober, serious, right? What else did you notice about this?
They were all dressed the same.
Yeah. Or at least groups are dressed in the same way, right? People who are doing the same thing are all dressed in the same outfits, right? Mm-hmm. So there seem to be these kind of almost like uniforms that people are wearing. Yeah, people who are performing this, like the dancers in the front are all dressed alike. The chanters in the back are all dressed alike, right? The people who are sort of bowing and waving the sandalwood fans in front of the, in front of the icons and all that, right? They're all dressed alike. Yeah, people who are doing the same thing are wearing the same clothes. I mean, not the same clothes, but that would be incredibly awkward and difficult. But
How deep the people doing the sandalwood fans, how deep their bows was? Because I was taught that like the deeper your bow is, the more respectful you are.
Yeah, okay. Deep bows, yes. Now, that relates in some ways to the purpose of this particular ritual, right? So this is the autumn offering to Confucius and his disciples. So what they're doing is they're making offerings of yellow silk and wine to Confucius and his disciples. Now, one thing that can be a little bit confusing about this, particularly for Western audiences who are not particularly familiar with East Asian religions, do you think Confucius is regarded as a god here? It is no. Yeah, Confucius' disciples are not gods. They're not saints, right? They're not, they are very, very important ancestor figures. One thing to understand about a lot of East Asian religions in particular, particularly Confucianism and Taoism, which we're going to be talking about today and next time, is that I'm not going to say they're atheistic religions, right, where there is no God, but they are religions that don't require a God. You can be a Confucian or a Taoist without believing in any particular god or gods. So oftentimes what we see in Confucian religious practice is really sort of more kind of ancestor worship than any sort of praise of particular gods. Anything else you guys observed? Chris.
Their synchronicity was almost perfect.
Yeah, near perfect synchronicity. Good. Everybody is moving in the proper way at the proper time, right? They are all doing it together. Everything is in harmony. Now it's slow, right? It's solemn. There are other Confucian ceremonies at different times of year that are faster and a bit more joyful. But every movement, every word, every article of clothing that the participants are wearing is prescribed by tradition. And these people are so in sync with each other because they've been doing this a really long time. And before them, their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents were doing this, right? So this is all, like every element of this ceremony has been passed down for centuries, mostly unchanged. And the synchronicity is a really, really important part of understanding what Confucianism is really about. Right? Confucius sees life, human life, as a kind of great ritual.
This is Confucius.
Confucius, yeah. And in order for a ritual to go off the way it's supposed to, everybody has to perform his or her particular part in the right way at the right moment. If anybody steps out of line, if one of the dancers fails to raise their arm the right way at the proper moment, the ritual's spoiled, right? The ritual is ruined. So ritual is in a lot of ways a metaphor for Confucius for not just human life, but for human relationships, right? Because you can't perform a ritual alone. It's something that's always performed with other people. And you and all of these other people have to get on the same page, decide who belongs where, doing what, and everyone has to do their part in order for the whole thing to go off harmoniously.
That sounds almost like the Dharma.
It is not unlike the idea of Dharma, yeah, that it's a different metaphor, but yeah, the idea is similar. And indeed, the Confucian ideal does also include a lot of respect for hierarchy. Right? You are supposed to behave in certain ways towards your social superiors, and in different ways towards your social inferiors, right? Never without kindness and never with condescension, but yeah, the attitudes you show your social superiors is supposed to be different from the attitudes you show your social inferiors. And in fact, that can be related to the very, very deep bows that you see the participants in this ritual giving the icons of Confucius and his disciples, right? You bow more deeply to someone who is your social superior than someone who is below you on the social ladder. Okay, so let's dig a little bit into the reading. Right? How did this go for you? What did you think of it?
That's like a whole bunch of life lessons.
Yeah, no, there's no
Okay, yeah,
long
there's,
story.
yeah, there's no narrative here, right?
Yeah.
It's just it's a bunch of little vignettes, most of which feature Confucius as a character. So Confucius is in a lot of ways the author of the Analects in the same way that Moses is the author of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Right? He's the central figure in it. And it's about his life and teachings, but he didn't really, it's virtually impossible that he actually wrote it. So yeah, we don't have a continuous narrative. Do we see certain continuous themes in it, though? Are there certain things that seem to repeat or pop up a lot? Pardon? Okay, can you give me an example?
Well, you've got him talking about how the government should act. The government should act like a leader should act like a father to his people.
Okay, can you point to a specific verse, though?
I can't off the top of my head.
Okay, and so try to find, if you can find something that relates to government, go for it. Otherwise, are there people who see other themes that are continuous in this? Government.
I mean, I can't point to a specific passage, but I know the general theme of Confucianism is to know your place.
Okay, to know your place. There's a little, oh, go ahead.
11.26, like he asked them like their deepest wishes, and it's talking about how each one of them like how they would rule their country, and then he gives like
Kind of laughs at them.
he kind of says like, well, they're
Yeah.
kind of just not going off what that's taught.
Yeah, okay, yeah, let's look at page 1339. Can I get a volunteer to read that one? All right, go for it, Corey.
Zilu, Zhongjian, Rankui, and Zhongqi were sitting with the master. The master said, "Forget for one moment that I'm your elder. You often say the world does not recognize our merits, but given the opportunity, what would you wish to do?" Zilu rushed to reply first, "Give me a country, not too small, but squeezed between powerful neighbors. It is under attack and in the grip of a famine. Put me in charge for 3 years. I would receive the spirits of the people and set them back on their feet." The master smiled. "Rankui, what about you?" The other replied, "Give me a domain of 60 to 70, or say 50 to 60 leagues within 3 years. I would secure the prosperity of its people as regards their spiritual well-being. However, this would naturally have to wait for the intervention of a true gentleman." "Zhongqi, what about you?" "I don't say that I would be able to do this, but I would like to learn in the ceremonies of the ancestral temple, such as a diplomatic conference, for instance, wearing chasuble and cap. I would like to play the part of a junior assistant." "And what about you, Zhengzhan?" Zhengzhan, who had been softly playing his zithern, plucked one last chord and pushed his instruments back. He replied, "I'm afraid my wishes are up to those of my three companions." The master said, "There's no harm in that. After all, each is simply confiding his personal aspirations." In late spring, after the making of the spring cloth has been completed, together with 5 or 6 companions and 6 or 7 boys, I would like to bathe in the river Yi and then enjoy the breeze of the rain dance terrace and go home singing. The master heaved a sigh and said, "I am with Dian." The 3 others left. Zhengzhan remained behind and said, "What did you think of their wishes?" The master said, "Each simply confined his personal aspirations." "Why did you smile at Zilu?" "One should govern a state through ritual restraint, yet his words were full of swagger." As for Rankui, wasn't he in fact talking about a full-fledged state? Indeed, have you ever heard of a domain of 60 to 70 or 50 to 60 leagues? And Zhongqi, wasn't he also talking about a state, a diplomatic conference in the ancestral temple? What could it be if not an international gathering? And if Zhongqi were there merely to play the part of a junior assistant, who would qualify for the main role?
Okay, so his criticisms here of his 3 disciples fall along slightly different lines, right? Why does he criticize Zilu?
Because he talks big.
Yeah, he's boastful, right? Give me a state that is in crisis, and within 3 years, I will whip it back into shape. Yeah, Zilu's desire is boastful. Now, what is the difference in Rankui and Gongzi Chi's desires? Are they boastful?
No, but Rankui wants to rule it, and Zhongqi's just kind of like, "I'll stand back and let someone else rule it, but I'd like to be a part of it."
Okay, yeah, so Ranqui's problem on the one hand is false modesty. Right, he is talking about, when he talks about a domain, right, he's talking about sort of like the small fiefdom of like a single lord, right? But the size of the domain that he describes, Confucius is like, no, that's not a lord's fiefdom, that's a full-fledged state he's talking about, right? And the idea that he would have to wait for a true gentleman to show up in order for this, to really be, for this domain to really be whipped back into shape. The idea of the gentleman is central to Confucian thought, right? This is a translation of the Chinese word junzi, Junzi. And the junzi is the, how do I want to phrase this, right? The junzi is sort of the perfectly cultivated man, right? The junzi is the man who, through participation in ritual and study, has made himself into, nobody's perfect, right? But has made himself not into a vulgar, condescending pedant, right? Not a barbarian forcing his will on other people, but a civilized person who knows his place and is able to help and guide others, right? So the junzi exercise, just through his presence, exercises a kind of moral force on other people, right? This is what, there's the one verse in which Confucius describes a particularly, a famous ancient king, right? Who ruled his people essentially by doing nothing, right? All he had to do was sit on his throne and face south, right, the proper ritual position, and his kingdom just fell into line around him, right? We see something similar when, let's see, where is that? Page 1339, book 9, verse 14. The master wanted to settle among the 9 barbarian tribes of the east. Someone said, "It is wild in those parts, how would you cope?" The master said, "How could it be wild once a gentleman has settled there, once a junzi has settled there? Once a junzi shows up in a place, then his moral authority influences everybody else." Yeah, Corey.
So he believes himself to be a junzi? Kind of in that statement, he kind of says, I am.
Yeah, he said, I guess in that sense, yeah, he probably would. But you don't, no one is born a junzi, right? You become a junzi through study, through practice of virtue, through constant cultivation. Yeah, Chris, what were you going to say?
Another common theme seems to be 3 years, specifically that number.
Uh-huh.
It says, the 3 years later, the son not feared from the father's way, what we just read was him referring to 3 years he'd have it fixed, and then later the master himself said that in 1 year he'd turn it around, but in 3 years it'd be like a full-fledged
Yeah,
thing.
and I'm not sure if this is the answer to all of the specific 3-year references, but I do know that 3 years was the prescribed period of mourning
He said that in his
for the dead. Yeah. And so 3 years, see, that 3-year period seems to have something to do with the time it takes to renew yourself after a loss. Yeah, go ahead.
Something else I noticed was the sense of right and wrong.
Okay, can we come back to that in a second? I just wanted to sort of continue a little bit with the 3 years thing. I want to go. There's the one where they specifically talk about mourning.
Yeah.
Yes, 1721. Can I get a volunteer to read this? Yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
Are you asked 3 years mourning for one's parents? This is quite long. If a gentleman stops all ritual practices for 3 years, practices will decay. If he stops all musical performances for 3 years, music will be lost. As the old crop is consumed, a new crop grows up, and for lighting the fire, a new lighter is used with each season. 1 year of mourning should be enough. The master said, if after only 1 year you were again to eat white rice and to wear silk, would you feel at ease? Absolutely. In that case, go ahead. The reason a gentleman prolongs his mourning is simply that since fine food seems tasteless to him, and music offers him no enjoyment, and the comfort of his house makes him uneasy, he prefers to do without all these pleasures. But now if you can enjoy them, go ahead. Zayu left. The master said, Zayu is devoid of humanity. After a child is born, for the first 3 years of his life, he does not leave his parents' bosom. 3 years mourning is a custom that is observed everywhere in the world. Does Zayu never enjoy the love of his parents, even for 3 years?
So what does Confucius argue here Zayu doesn't understand about the prescribed period of mourning?
That it's time that you take to just kind of like forget about everything and just like think about what actually happened. And once you've understood what happens and you come to terms with it, then you can continue on with what you
Yeah. And if you're somebody who can come to terms with a loss really, really quickly, then you are probably not of this sort of superior sensibility, right? A true gentleman is not just a practitioner of rites and of music, right? Which are the things that Zayu references here, right? Well, if I don't participate in rituals for 3 years, I'll forget the rituals. If I stop playing music for 3 years, I'll forget how. So why should, pardon?
He's more concerned with forgetting everything instead of actually sitting down and learning.
Yeah, he's more worried about, like he says, if you were, after only 1 year, you were again to eat white rice and to wear silk, would you feel at ease? And he says, absolutely. So it's more like, I don't want to lose the finer things.
Yeah.
Like this 3 years is your reset period.
And this indicates that Zayu doesn't really understand what it means to be a junzi, right? To be a cultivated person. He is seeing it as a set of accomplishments and material comforts. Whereas what Confucius is mostly concerned about, right? Remember what has to happen for a ritual to actually come off properly, right? Each person has to do his or her part in tandem with all of the others. Right. So what Confucius's philosophy is really about is human relationships. That's what's most important. And if you can't generate enough feeling for your parents when they die to spend those 3 years mourning, then you clearly don't have those finer feelings that the junzi is supposed to cultivate. Right, the argument here being that 3 years, right, that's the amount of time that a child is completely dependent on its parents. And so you're supposed to then give those 3 years back to your parents when they die. This is another big theme in Confucius's philosophy, the idea of filial piety. Right, that is the respect that a child is expected to give his or her parents. So just to sort of quickly point to another passage, and then we'll sort of get to what you wanted to point us to, Ashlyn. All right, there is, let's see, where is the one that I'm looking for here?
It's just the respect that the child is supposed to do to their parents.
Yeah, filial piety, I mean, it's about a little bit more than simply respect. It's about honoring the memory of your parents, honoring the wishes of your parents, even when they're gone. Right. 111 on page 1335. The master said, when the father is alive, watch the son's aspirations. When the father is dead, watch the son's actions. If 3 years later the son has not veered from the father's way, he may be called a dutiful son indeed. So the idea here is that even after your parent is gone, your respect for his or her memory is supposed to endure. And I think this is sort of one of the ways in which Confucianism tends to lend itself towards the kind of ancestor worship that we saw in the autumn offering ceremony. Right? You are supposed to continue to respect and to honor past generations. And even if your parent was a bad parent or a bad person, you are supposed to continue to honor that person's memory. Yeah, Corey?
Do the poems he talks about have to do with this?
Yes and okay. When he references the poems,
Yeah, because in 17:9 he talks about how, like, if you read the poems and, like, it'll tell you, like, how to do this, and you'll also, like, learn a lot of stuff.
yeah. What he's referring to there is a set of books, well, part of a set of books that are referred to as the Confucian classics. Right? Confucianism stresses the importance of long and careful study in the cultivation of the sensibilities of a junzi. And so one of the 5 books you are supposed to study is called the Classic of Poetry. And there are selections from the Classic of Poetry actually right before the Analects in this anthology if you're curious about it. But yeah, these are very, very ancient Chinese poems that predate Confucius himself. The other classics are the I Ching, or Book of Changes. This is a divination manual. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the I Ching. It's like it's a book full of these little sort of stick patterns, and you open it up to a particular stick pattern, and it says something cryptic that is then supposed to guide you in your daily life. And you're like, this, we know that like this is the way divination tends to work. Right? We saw in the Odyssey, for example, that seers are always giving people alternatives. Like, well, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this other thing will happen. There were these, oracles in Greek temples who were women who would take a lot of magic mushrooms and say something cryptic that was supposed to help you. Yeah, that's divination in a nutshell. For Chris.
That's like fortune cookies and stuff.
Not quite. The advice on a fortune cookie is a little more clear typically than what you find in the I Ching. But yeah, there's also a ritual manual called the Book of Rites. A book of sort of historical letters and speeches called the Book of Documents. And there's one more that is escaping me at the moment. What is it? Right. A historical chronicle called the Spring and Autumn Annals. I will explain in a moment why it is called the Spring and Autumn Annals, but I know that Ashlyn, you have been patiently waiting to make your point from earlier.
How this dude keeps coming back and asking for advice on how to get the people on page 1335.
Okay.
Duke, I asked, what should I do to win the hearts of the people? Confucius replied, raise the straight and set them above the crooked, and you will win the hearts of the people. If you raise the crooked and set them above the straight, the people will deny you their support. He keeps getting like this dude keeps